Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for being here in spite of there being lobster rolls and wines outside. So thank you for coming here and helping us celebrate our 125th anniversary with this exhibition called Artists Choose Parrish Part 2. My name is Monica Ramirez Montagut, and I'm the director at the Parrish Art Museum. And like I mentioned, we are celebrating our 125th anniversary and 10 years in this building. I would like to acknowledge that the parish is situated on 14 acres of ancestral territory of the Shinnecock people, whom we recognize as the traditional stewards of this land. The Artists Choose Parrish takes place in 3 parts, and hopefully you saw the first part, and we're opening part 2, and on October 28, we open part 3. Artists Choose Parrish was this idea that we had to celebrate the anniversary by actually leveraging and mining all the local incredible talent that we have here in the East End, and hoping that perhaps 5 or 10 artists would respond to our call. And we had 41 incredibly talented artists saying yes to this proposal to choose objects from our museum collection and put them in dialogue with works of their own making. So it has been wonderful seeing what all the artists came proposed for the exhibition. Certainly, it gave us very different ways of understanding our collection that were very unexpected. But I think most importantly, what we see with this Artists Choose Parrish exhibition and the series of contributions by each of the artists is that from the curatorial point of view, it would have been very difficult for us to tap into what all the artists brought from themselves into these exhibitions, because they brought in their professional side of things, which we as curators would have been able to tap into, but they brought in very personal narratives, their own lived experience, their own loves and admirations and relationships. And those invisible threads, that invisible network of love and respect and mentorship, is something that would have been difficult for us to multiply times 41. So I really want to thank all the artists for bringing their whole selves into this exhibition and delivering just really the best kind of anniversary we could have hoped for the parish. So thank you to all the artists and to the artists here with us today. Thank you to our Board of Trustees. Thank you to Corinne Ernie, the Louis B. Dorothy Coleman Chief Curator of Art and Education, Associate Curator Caitlin Halloran and Brianna Hernandez, Registrar Chris McNamara, and Preparator Robin Klopfer. Thank you to the whole team at the parish, because it does take a village to deliver this quality every 3 months for all of you. It takes a village, and this parish village is certainly committed to the mission of access to excellence, access to the arts and the creativity of our local artists, and also with global impact. Thank you to the donors for their generous support of Artists Choose Parrish, starting with the estate of Millie Brin, a former trustee. And also we want to give a special thanks to Bank of America that funded the anniversary exhibition, but also funded the reception that we all enjoyed earlier today. So thank you so much, Bank of America. Thank you, Stephen Meringoff, who supported the exhibition in honor of Robin and Fred Siegel. Thank you to the Robert Lehman Foundation, to Sandy and Steve Perlbinder, really very devoted trustees, always supporting, but also here present and giving us good, solid advice. Aggie Gund, in honor of Dorothy Lichtenstein, the Goldman Sonnenfeld Foundation, Jennifer and Sean Cohen, who are also here today, Alexandra Stanton and Sam Nadapoff, Fern and Leonard Tesler, Jacqueline Brody, also here today, the Evelyn Toll Family Foundation, thank you, Barbara, the great Marty McClanahan, Fred Messel, and the Herman Goldman Foundation. So it is now with great pleasure that I ask my colleague Corinne to take over the event and get us talking with the artists and learning more about what moved them to do this exhibition with us. Don't forget to discuss Philip Guston that everyone wanted to make sure we share that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Monica. And thank you, everyone, for coming out in such a great number tonight. It's a real pleasure to be speaking with three of the artists who are participating in the second part of Artists Choose Parrish. And I just want to explain a little bit more the process of how we did this. So basically, we invited the artists to go through our collection online first. We have 3,600 works, and most of them are actually here, and that's a real blessing. So once they had gone through the collection online, they came here to the vault, and I heard it from more than one artist that it felt like Christmas to be actually in front of these wonderful works. And I think it shows the connections of the artists here who used to live here, the artists who do live here now, and also art historical references. So with no more further ado, I want to introduce the artists. To my immediate right is Marina Adams. She is a painter based in Bridgehampton and New York City, and also the hills outside of Parma in Italy. She is the recipient of the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Fellowship and the Award of Merit Medal for Painting from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Marina has participated in various solo and group exhibitions, including the Modern Art Museum in Fort Worth, Milwaukee Art Museum, and Camden Art Center in London, and her work is in the collection of the MoMA, the Metropolitan Museum, among many others. Then Suzanne McClelland has exhibited extensively in the US and abroad since the early 1990s. Her practice includes large-scale paintings, works on paper, and books. These often extract fragments of speech or text from various political or cultural sources, explore the social, symbolic, and material possibilities that reside within language, and celebrate the physicality of speech and sound. Suzanne parses such issues as the limitations of malleability of communication, the impact technology has on interpreting information, and the mechanics of translation. She's based in New York City and Orient on the North Fork. So it's great to have someone here from the North Fork. Then Ralph Gibson is a photographer. He's best known for his fine art images that explore the surreal visual nature of the subconscious. He has received fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Guggenheim Foundation, and he's been awarded the Leica Medal of Excellence, and in 2018 was appointed by the President of France the Chevalier of the Legion of Honor. Ralph has had exhibitions at the San Francisco Art Institute, the Pasadena Art Museum, Fotografiska Museet in Stockholm, and the Whitney Museum in New York City, among others. And in 2019, Ralph was inducted into the International Photography Hall of Fame and Museum. Yeah, that's it. And he lives in Sag Harbor. Welcome. So I want to get started by asking each of you about the process. What were you looking for in the collection, and what did you find, or did you find what you were looking for? And I also want to point out what's interesting to me is that some of you opted to choose just one work from the collection to show with one of yours. And Suzanne, you chose, I think, 20 works from the collection and some of your own. So who wants to go first? Marina.
Okay. Is this working?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I'll say I thought it was a wonderful conceived exhibition. The history of the East End and artists is obviously quite strong, and I am a new part of it, I guess, really just the last couple of years. But when you wrote, I thought immediately how fabulous, because of the, as I say, the history of particularly the Krasner-Pollock generation. And I think I was quick to write and say, do you have a de Kooning?
That was very quick, and you snapped him right away.
Because I figured if they did,
Yeah.
And they said they did, I said, save it for me. And, you know, my history, if I have a history with de Kooning, I got to New York in the 80s, in the early 80s, for graduate school. And, you know, what was happening in the 80s was interesting, contemporary-wise. But I myself started to go to the Xavier Fourcade Gallery, and I saw the late de Kooning paintings as well as the Joan Mitchells. And those works actually had a very strong effect on me. And so it was really just fabulous to find out that there was the one painting, and I could get it. And, you know, like every artist, you want to see, basically, do I hold up? Can I put something of mine next to somebody who's acknowledged? And how does it flow? Does it feel, you know, does it feel right?
I think it flows very well with your work.
So it was very, you know, for me, that was like an open and shut
Right.
case. So.
Okay, I'd like to ask Suzanne about the process. I think it was quite a different process. It was very, very much of a process to look through the collection. And you are showing some of your new works. I know your work is very language-based. And so I know you were looking for language, for lines, denotations. You have a beautiful book by Yoko Ono and John Lennon in the vitrine. So please go and check it out. Yeah.
Well, I was thrilled to have the opportunity to look through things in a way that had nothing to do with trying to place my own work. I basically just wanted to sort of find out more about myself through finding images that I had an affinity with. And I first went to the birch fields, and then I wanted them. And I waited. So I just did it very slowly in bits and pieces over the winter, and wanted to just discover, I wanted to find things that I didn't know about. So I started to make groups of images that had connections formally and conceptually. And I think one of the last things I found was the Yoko Ono book, and yet it became kind of, it was a circular experience, and it sort of brought me back to my own work in some way. The way she talks about what the sky means to her. So I've been working out here off and on since the early 90s, and but have settled in Orient Village in the last 5 years. And in the early 90s, I worked in Springs down the road from the Pollock-Krasner house, and worked unstretched on very large canvases outdoors. And I think that was the beginning of my connection to landscape as a place that doesn't necessarily have to have a horizon line. So that was my, I mean, I chose a lot of work and then had to cut things out, and then there were things the only things I couldn't have that I wanted were the birch fields. Which Donald
Someone was faster. Donald Sultan was faster.
I waited a long time before I claimed things, yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious about the dedication to Audre Lorde in your new work, in two of your new works. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Well, she writes, she has a really beautiful essay. I guess I could have provided that too, but where she connects, she kind of questions the notion of resistance as, and she wrote this in, I think it was 1978, I can't remember. It has to do with how we resist forces that need to be changed. And that in that process of resistance, you can lose track of the yes within you. And I think it's a really powerful essay. And I often work off of other people's texts in my paintings.
Right. Thank you. Ralph, your choice seemed very obvious very quickly and caused quite a bit of headache for other artists because you went right for the Guston and the large painting of the Guston. And I know there were other artists who really wanted that one. But he's in the same, you and the Guston are in the same room as Stanley Whitney, who has another Guston and also has a connection to that artist. Can you talk a little bit about how that moment happened when you took that picture on Prince Street, I think it was, and you saw a Guston there?
Well, I'll have to back step a few years, but I was always fascinated, and in my brief statement, I mentioned how Guston had the courage to go from abstract, non-objective work into his form of figuration. And it occurred to me about that time, we all know that photography is largely gestural. You see a lot of gestural photographs. But I was thinking, our friend, who many of you know, Nada Young, the great collector and lovely person, has a Guston painting of a finger pointing. So all this was going on. I'd been to a big show at Hauser and Wirth of Guston's, big retrospective about that time. And even though I was thinking more of shapes, I was looking at those white bars on the crosswalk, and this figure approached. And I had essentially created my frame prior to his arrival. And so that augured well. I knew I was doing the right thing. And so I took that photograph, and then Hauser and Wirth had a painting over in Southampton in the gallery window for about 6 months, a massive Guston, which had the bottom 2/3 of it was just a color field with a hand on the top and a shirt cuff. And so I've been studying a lot of Morton Feldman and minimal music, and of course everybody in this room tonight is familiar with the history of Long Island artists, and we all, to one degree or another, are part of it. And so it all came together in that Feldman, for some reason, considered, he was a great composer, as many of you know, considered Guston to be his brother, and they spoke daily. And when Guston turned figurative, Feldman dropped him. Mm-hmm. Just cut him off. And at dinner, I asked Stanley about that. He has more information on it because Stanley studied with Guston. But so all these forces conspired to, when I took that picture, I said, this is going to be a homage to Guston. Then along comes this exhibition. And so I asked you if you had a Guston, and it really wasn't the one that I might have thought of. You know, then I saw the one in the collection, and I just grabbed it. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that's interesting is that the photograph next to his painting seemed to correspond more by virtue of the shapes in the painting rather than the gesture has little or nothing to do with it. You know, those who know his work can evoke the gesture in his work, but that's the whole story to that particular event.
That's wonderful.
Long.
Thank you. Thanks, Ralph. It seems like serendipity played a role in this whole exhibition series, and you know, a lot of artists were looking for formal connections or for artists that they knew, but they also chose artists that they didn't know. And in this particular part, I feel like there's a lot of investigation into process, the material, form, but also the physical experience of the artwork. And we have also a few sculptures there. So something I see in all of you somehow is the importance of line or edge, and I think also music and language. Maybe more the two of you. I just wanted to ask you to maybe elaborate a bit more on your process and how these elements play into your process.
Language and music, well, they do overlap, because you hear language and hear music, but they also, I think, music does a thing that, I mean, it's general, I don't know, it's such a general notion, but I'm really glad you brought up Morton Feldman, because he is someone I didn't know that he had such a close relationship with Guston, and that he would feel so strongly about that change in Guston's work that he would, you said he stopped talking to him?
Yes, he severed the friendship permanently.
So these things, I don't know if those things happen right now, where people feel so strongly about their position that they disconnect from probably a lifelong dialogue. And I'm not answering your question.
It's a good answer.
I could just go on.
You know, bringing it back to de Kooning. De Kooning was one of the few artists actually that embraced Guston and did not sever him. I mean, Morton Feldman was an extreme example because they were so close, you know. But now that I've heard you talk, you know, I did want to say that for me, it wasn't just the respect and love I have particularly for de Kooning's late paintings, because the earlier work, although I appreciated it, it never really made, it never had an influence in terms of my own work and my own practice, but it was the late work. Yeah. But these two works, I mean, my painting, the drawing, and the line, which you brought up, really comes out of my experience in Italy, where the studio is in the country, and it's the first time I had. Before that, I always worked in the city, and so that kind of you know, space in between, you could say, the figurative in terms of a landscape kind of space, and at the same time it being abstract, I also feel very close to, particularly de Kooning's late paintings. And so when I was very happy to see that that was one, and I felt that there would be a conversation created,
Right.
yeah, from that.
Is that painting, that, I remember the Met did that show, it was right when Pulp Fiction came out, so what year was that? 90?
Ooh. 94?
Yeah, it was, and they did that huge show of his late paintings, and I was just, because we went to see Pulp Fiction after that, and so I put those two things together, but like they, the edge, those those late paintings have, he like lets line and edge kind of change places all the time, which I think is really masterful. And I don't know if, I mean, there are all kinds, there's a myth, you all might know more about this, but I don't know if he was losing language at that point or less connected to language at that point, but it seems they were so forceful and so sure of themselves. And the whiteness of the way that white functions as a color in that painting is really fascinating.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it was one of the things I was interested in with the Pollock that I chose, which
Right.
was that the ground and the paper becomes like the material, and then the line is kind of secondary almost.
Right, right. Ralph?
While you were speaking, I was thinking, this afternoon I was reading some notes from Stravinsky, and he said that, with the exception of a few people, if you look at the score for a symphony, you really don't hear the music. It is a form of notation, and it is a written form. Whereas if you look at a written page of text, you will hear the words in your head. And so while you were discussing that idea, I'm thinking about how I was 18 in the Navy in New York on 10th Street in 1957, when an awful lot of what we're looking at was just starting to bubble up to the surface. And curiously enough, Feldman said there was a period in New York. New York was great in the 50s. There was a period of about 6 weeks where nobody knew what art was. They started sorting it out shortly thereafter. But it was an art that the critics had to explain. The people of a higher aesthetic order who had a backstory were able to deconstruct it in some fashion. But I love being out here and somehow relating to the incredible heritage, because as Americans, we don't have an awful lot of that from which to draw our inspiration. I go to Europe constantly throughout my entire life. Marina, you have your house there. You can look at a lot of art in Europe that has had a tremendous influence on what we have done here. But being in Long Island is about as close as you're going to get to any seminal source of the art of an American art, albeit somewhat influenced. But you know, when Pollock took it off the easel, that was considered a quantum leap. Took the canvas off the easel.
No, definitely, and I think you're really touching upon a very important point that, you know, American art, like this was a birthplace of a very important period of American art, of abstract expressionism. So I wanted to ask you, all of you, what it means for you to be connected to the East End, to be connected to a place like the Parrish, to be connected to a collection like the Parrish, because you're really bringing to light art history and you know, aspects of art history that maybe we as curators wouldn't think about. And I find that really fascinating. And I think we all see that in the show that we have here.
Well, let me jump on this because previously there was exhibition Artists Choose Artists,
Yeah.
right? Many of us participated in that as well.
Yeah.
I don't know of any world-class museums that are doing this. I'm currently not aware that this interaction is transpiring elsewhere. And then along comes this is another iteration, to see contemporary work hung alongside masterworks from the collection, I feel is an enormous identifying factor for what the Parrish has come to represent. There's a lot of talk about rudderless museums and this and that. We've all had those debates. But I'll state unequivocally that Parrish is taking a very vivid stand, taking a bold position with regards to all this.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and I will say it's very particular because it's a particular museum. What I think is so fantastic as well is how local it is, but at the same time it's using the artists have created a history here that takes it past that makes it international in a way. So it was a great, as I said, conception about using all of us and recognizing that now as many or more artists are in the North Fork, contemporary artists, than on the South Fork, but to incorporate so many of us and let us go into your vaults.
The North Fork will need a couple more generations. Excuse me.
But people are there.
No, it was really.
It was a great,
Thank you. It was a real collaboration with Monica. I mean, we kicked back and forth some ideas and came up with Artists Choose Parrish, right? So I think that was really a great putting together our minds. And Suzanne, you said something very interesting also in your statement that collections like these are important because of what they reveal, but also what they say about erasure, and that they need to be shown. So can you? Oh, good.
What we are calling American history is really,
Use your mic.
Thanks. The museums are American museums tend to emphasize the work that has European origins, and yet this is a continent that had full-fledged cultures existing and making things in visual ways and musically and in language and all of these things. And I think we're in a very important and interesting moment, especially, here, like Jeremy, I don't know if he's here.
Jeremy
tonight,
Dennis,
but
I think he's here.
He spoke really
he's
clearly
here.
about what it is to be American and not be from Europe. So I think that this is a really important time and very exciting time for developing these collections and expanding upon them and letting them really truly reveal those things that have been erased.
Right, and for those who don't know, Jeremy Dennis is from the Shinnecock Nation, and we've been working together for the past 5 years, I think.
And spoke in the last group, the first iteration of this three-part exhibition.
Right. Thank you. I think we could open it up to some questions from the audience, maybe 2 or 3 questions, if anybody has any questions for any of the artists. Monica.
Yeah, I'm very curious about that notion of, yes, the museum was born in Europe, right? So sometimes we're asking of museums to actually go pretty much against what created them in origin. So what would, in your mind, what would be an American museum then? Or what would artists like to see museums in the United States as a great museum?
I'll be very brief, if I may. We know historically that art always reflects the society within which it's made as a cultural phenomenon. But in the case of the Parrish and in the case of this series of shows we're discussing, that's specifically the point of the exhibitions. And that resonates much greater emphasis in terms of my response.
I just think that it's, what do we want a museum to be? Is that the question?
I think there was the idea that, the art that we're showing was created here in the East End and created a whole America at the leadership position in the global world, right, after Christmas. So should museums that show that art be different? Should we be different
Different from?
from the European model?
Oh, well, I mean, I think that's what, I would hope that museums, the idea of what a museum can do in a community is changing as quickly as artists change. So I would hope that that would be what can happen. I mean, in every town I lived in, I moved constantly. It was usually whatever the art center, and maybe they had a museum, but it was usually a historical museum. That was sort of a kind of safe place, like a place where people could actually have a conversation and maybe even hear each other, possibly. See things that maybe came from other parts of the world that weren't a reflection of the actual immediate environment. So I think to me, it's a way more important than religious centers and stadiums, which is what, in the Midwest, there is a stadium in every town, every high school, and there are lights for nighttime games, So, I mean, I think that it's just as important to have a museum be funded and supported and visited.
Yeah, and it's funny. Speaking of, if you think about what's happening now culturally, it seems to me that we've erred on the side of entertainment. And that even when you watch sports, it's all about entertainment, and even, the halftime and the museum is, I guess, from Europe, it's this idea, though, of something else, of either quiet, as you say, a space for conversation, a space for thought, a space for opening something up. But it can be, I don't know, it doesn't even have to be housed necessarily. I mean, we've housed them, but it's the idea that there is celebration even in terms of culture. And I think that's very, very important. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that idea of celebration and dialogue. I think that's really essential, and whatever form that dialogue takes, right?
Yeah.
Well, in translation, it's important. I know that I was greatly influenced by just strange exhibitions I saw in small towns, that just somebody, a curator, brought them in. I mean, it doesn't have to take the place of sports. I love tennis, by the way.
No, me too. I was watching it today. It's not about that. I mean, sports have their place, but I'm just saying that the culture of even sports now has become so much about entertainment. Whereas, and I like what you say about bringing something in. We had this conversation, I think, the other night about somehow Boyce came up, and I recalled that I saw that fantastic Joseph Boyce show at the Guggenheim when I was very, in my early 20s. I don't even know if I had moved to New York yet. And I really didn't know what it was. I couldn't place it within anything that I'd experienced. And yet it stayed with me, and it has continued to stay with me. I remember it vividly. And it didn't bother me that I didn't know what it meant. It's just that it had such presence, it had such power, and it just opened something up. And I think ultimately that's what we're talking about. And that kind of experience is good for people,
Yeah, I think that's very beautifully put.
Well, I was thinking that in the European museums and European culture is essentially centered around keeping those cultures alive. We're 250 years old here in America. We're still in the process of developing our culture, whereas many of those great countries thousands of years of Roman, Italian history, French history, German history. They're essentially trying to keep their languages and their culture as alive as they possibly can.
And I think, yeah, I think there is more resistance in Europe for keeping developing a culture than in America. I mean, America has always developed new things, you know. It always comes from America. I'm European, so I think that's what we saw when we were growing up.
Well, we have no academy here, so to speak. In Europe, they do have academies. If you go to the Louvre tomorrow, you'll probably see somebody with an easel copying the Mona Lisa or Déjeuner sur l'herbe or something like that. And that's how they keep things going. This is called the academic approach. We have none such, and as a result, innovation is our lingua franca. That's what we're encouraged to do, which back to the origins of this museum and the art of this part of the world. That's what really happened after World War II.
Yeah.
Improvisation, yeah, and I think if you're going to talk about improvisation, you have to go to, first of all, native communities, because I think if you even look at native religions, they have a flexibility and, in a way, a sense of, dare I use the term improvisation, that they allow, it's like what's necessary, what's needed by the people. And I think then you can also look at, African-American contributions, I mean, clearly, right, in terms of improvisation. I mean, we have the music, but so many other aspects of it. So it goes way beyond,
Absolutely, and I think museums have to embrace all of that and create the platform, the forum for a dialogue for all of it.
There remains the fact that, for example, I walked through that first room and I saw all those James Brooks. Now, I had kind of known about James Brooks since around 1955 or 6, but I had never seen that many of them, and I never really understood his entire vocabulary, how he used his shapes, his colors, attitude towards scale and stuff. And so all of a sudden, here I am having an epiphany just now, which is really what a museum does at its very best. It kind of brightens you up, opens the eyes. So.
Exactly, and he was part of that innovation, with all the abstract expressionists who came here. So he lived here, and it was part of shaping that art history. If there are no further questions, I want to thank the artists, and please enjoy the show and enjoy the museum. Thank you.